In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use a bulb duster and Delta Dust, the dust formulation insecticide, to treat the interior of homes, and specifically interior wall voids. Now, before we go over how to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the attachments and the use of PPE. So anytime you're applying this stuff, you've got to have gloves on. For the purposes of this demonstration today, I'm not going to actually mix this, so this is an unopened bottle, and I'm not going to actually put dust in. But if you're applying this dust, you need gloves on, glasses, and the label doesn't call for it, but you can wear a respirator. If you're going to be applying the dust in a attic or a crawl space where it's out in the open where you might breathe it, I would strongly recommend a respirator. As you'll see here, when we treat the interior of wall void, a lot of times you don't even see the dust because it all goes inside of the walls, in which case it's probably not imperative to have a respirator in this case. But I'm not saying that you can't have one, I'm just saying if you're just doing interior wall voids, then it's probably okay if you don't. But definitely gloves. When you're mixing, you want your big heavy duty gloves on, just because there's so much quantity of it. If you spill while you're mixing the product, then wash your hands thoroughly. Read the label. This particular product, like I said, doesn't require that you use a respirator, but if you're using some product that does, then you need to follow the label. Read the label before you use the product. When you're inside, so for doing the interior of the house, when you go in, you need to either take off your shoes, or if you have coverings that go over your shoes that make it so that you don't track mud or dirt, then you can wear those. But if you don't have those coverings, then you have to take off your shoes every time you go into somebody's house, unless the homeowner specifically tells you that you don't need to. With that said, there's a couple of attachments here. These bulb dusters come with a really fine point. They don't put out a lot of dust, but they're really good for getting in cracks. And you've got your bigger nozzles that put out quite a bit of dust. This is a brand new bulb duster, so we don't have any product out, which is why I don't have gloves on. And then this is an unopened bottle. But now, when you do the interior of the house, what you need to understand is that an interior wall will not have, it typically does not have any insulation in it. And so this is about a 6-inch wall, 5-inch wall with sheetrock and then studs on the inside. And inside, in between those studs, are just great big voids, which is why we call them the wall voids. Now, if you're treating an exterior wall on the wall that leads to the outside, or that separates the inside of the house from the outside, that's called an exterior wall, that wall will have insulation in it. And so if you treat that area, your dust isn't going to go as far as if you treat an inside wall. When you treat an inside wall, this whole area is going to be filled with dust. Now, the other thing about treating the interior walls is that there's a lot of times cracks that develop from the crawl space, from slabs, or just from other walls on the inside where bugs can get in, and it's a safe area for them to travel to and from. A lot of insects and arachnids, there are several species of spiders that will travel along the electrical wires that run through the house, and so those are kind of superhighways for a lot of insect and arachnid pests. So it's not imperative to treat every single wall void throughout the house. Now, obviously, the more you do, the more thorough it's going to be, but the bugs circulate through the house. And so it's not like there's a bug right here and he's just going to stay here. If there's a bug there, he's traveling through all of them. So if you do every third outlet, you'll have a pretty good chance at controlling those kinds of pests. The other thing that we do when we're treating the interiors is it depends a little bit on if it's a quarterly or a monthly or an EOM service. If it's a quarterly service, then they only get one interior service in the course of the winter, because we typically offer the winter interior service December, January, and February. Now, that's true if it's a Grand Valley account. It may be different if you're treating an account up in Crested Butte or Telluride, but for most accounts in the valley, you've got December, January, and February. So if it's quarterly, you're only going to have the opportunity one time to do that house, and also for a quarterly account, you have a little bit more time that you can spend on it. If you're treating a monthly account here in the valley, then you're going to be out there December, January, and February 3 times to do that interior treatment. And also, each service takes a little bit less time. And so if you're servicing a monthly account, keep track of which outlets you do, and then when you go back next time, do some other outlets. And so you don't spend as much time on each service, but for each, for the whole winter, they get just as much done. So actually, if it's monthly, they'll probably get more done. So what you do here is you take off the electrical, this plate cover. I would recommend just using a hand driver because, as you can see there, to take that screw out, it takes about 3 seconds. And so it's not really, doesn't really save the time to have a power driver. Furthermore, if you have a power driver, it's really easy for you to break the platelet. In fact, this one's already been broken because somebody tightened that screw too much, which if you're using a power driver, it's really easy to do that. If you use a hand driver, you can tell how tight it's getting. Come on over here with the camera. Now, on these walls, you can see that there's an electrical box. It's a plastic box, and then in between the box and the wall, which is the sheetrock, there's a little hole. And what we want to do with this is actually a pretty good house. It's pretty tight, and so you definitely have to use the smaller one. In some houses, they're built so well that there's no crack here, but those are pretty rare, and it usually won't be on every outlet. But you can see here that I got that whole attachment inserted in there, and then you can just dust in there. Now typically when you dust, you won't see a lot of dust come out because it's all internal, but it is going in there. If your bulb duster is working, then it is injecting a lot of dust into that wall void. And then you do several puffs in there and it'll fill up that area, and that's it, you're done. And when you put this on, this whole area on the interior of that wall is going to be treated, and it'll last for a long time. I'll say one other thing. When you fill these up, you've got to make sure that you don't overfill them. If you go over half, then when you force the dust out, it'll come out in great big, instead of a poof and a really misty fog, it'll come out and it'll like drop on the ground in great big globs. And so when you fill these up, make sure you fill them about halfway full or less. And then also, when the dust stops coming out in a noticeable cloud, then you'll know it's time to fill it up. And like I said, when you fill it up, make sure you wear your gloves. But that's it. Then you go ahead and put this back on. And like I said, it's best to use a hand driver just because you can see here it takes 5, 4, 3, 2, 4 seconds. So use a hand driver, then you don't break these. Like I said, you'll find several of them that have already been broke, but we don't want to break any. And when you tighten this down, obviously all this is doing is holding on a 3-ounce piece of plastic. Okay, so we're not torquing, a head, the head on a great big engine. You don't need to apply 1,000,000 pounds of force. Just barely snug it. That's all you got to do. Done. And then what you want to do is, once you've done that one, you want to try to do at least one per wall. And that'll give you pretty good coverage. If it's a quarterly account and you have a little more time, you can do a few more. If it's a monthly account, you may not be able to do that many, but then you'll be back in a month and you'll do some more, and you'll be back again in a month after that and you'll do some more. Now, if for any reason you can't access the interior of the wall from an electrical outlet, so for example, there might be a situation where older homes don't have an electrical outlet, or they don't have very many, because they were built before the code required them to put, one every so many feet. In those situations, there's another way to treat inside of the walls, especially on older homes. It's probably a little harder to demonstrate on this house, but sometimes you'll find little cracks. So maybe around this vent, you can't treat the vent in through here, but if on the outside of the vent there's a breach in the sheetrock that leads into the wall void, then that may be a decent place to access it. Another place that you can sometimes access in certain situations is underneath the floorboard. Sometimes you can find a little breach, which this one doesn't, but sometimes you can find a breach where there's a little crack. And then from here, you could go up underneath the floorboard and then inject inside of the wall void. Like I said, every home's a little different, so some, the craftsmanship was good enough that they didn't leave any cracks in the bottom. are on the bottom, but some they did, and in some older homes, cracks have developed over time. So you might have to be a little imaginative and look around and find the best place to find those holes. But the objective is to treat inside the wall void. After you do the electrical platelets and you do throughout the house, if you've got more time, another thing that you want to do as far as applying dust is other areas where there's breaches in the wall. So anywhere a pipe or a window or a door or a wire comes up through the house, there's going to be a breach. So for example, the bathroom or the kitchen in the bathroom is a common place where dust is a really good formulation. So here we have a electrical stove, and so obviously there's going to be a wire back behind here that breaches the wall and either goes down into the crawl space or back into the wall void. And so there's probably going to be a little crack around that wire where bugs can come in. So what you do is you just take your bulb duster and you can dust underneath it, and it doesn't take much. And on this one I would actually use a bigger, in fact I'm going to grab one, not that I'm actually putting down product right now, but just for the purpose of demonstration. On this one I would probably use this tip instead of the small tip, because that's going to put out a little bit more. And you can poof some back there and poof some back over here, and then that'll fill that area up. Like I said, it doesn't take much, but that way any bug that comes in from that wire, they're going to crawl around there for a bit, and when they do, they're going to come in contact with it. It's effective for spiders, it's effective for a lot of beetles, roly-polies, it's effective on ants, although sometimes ants will figure out where it is, and then they'll create a pheromone trail around it. So that is possible. If you're having an issue with ants and you've already done dust, then you should probably switch to Phantom or Termidor. But if they don't have an issue with ants, then this will probably suppress any potential problems. Same thing with the fridge. Okay, it's got a water line that's coming in. Assuming that it's a modern fridge, it'll have a water line coming in. It's also got the electrical line coming in. Now your sink's got a breach underneath. Now usually underneath people's sinks in that cabinet, they almost all look like this. So people put a lot of stuff down there. So you might have to take some stuff out, but where that pipe comes into the wall will be a hole, and then that that hole where that pipe comes in will then lead down into the crawl space. And obviously it's a superhighway for bugs to come inside. So treat around that. You can treat again. Apparently something in this house is causing me to have allergies. You've got pipes that come in here. It's the same thing for bathroom underneath the vanities where the pipes come in. This is a really good method to treat, a really good formulation to treat the garage. They've got lots of boxes and things like that, which almost everybody does in their garage. Dust is a really good formulation to get around those boxes, to get around all the debris and stuff that they have in their garage. Again, it doesn't take a lot. The other thing that you want to be careful of when you're using a bulb duster is not to tilt it upside down. If you tip it upside down and then spray, again, you're going to get that globbing effect where a lot of dust comes out and makes a big fat mess. And so make sure it's either upright or, depending on how full it is, if it's about halfway full, then you can't tip it more than about a 90 degrees. If it's if it's slightly more than halfway full, which is probably overfilled, then you've got to keep it up on a nearly vertical up tilt, so that the dust, like the majority of the dust, doesn't fall past here and then glop out. The other thing is, when you do the inside, is you need your toolbox where all this stuff can have a place. Typically we use a bucket with the pockets on the side, and so you've got a place for each one of your individual tips, for an extra Delta Dust container for your gloves. When I use Delta Dust, I use the disposable latex gloves, and then I just throw them away each time. if you do make a mess, so if you fill it up too full, you're not thinking, you tip it upside down, comes out, you've got to clean that up. Best way to clean that up is with blue shop rags. You can use a dry one at first to get the majority of it up, and then use a damp rag and get the rest of it up. But you've got to clean that up if you make a mess. And that's pretty much all there is to it as far as the dusting. Now, as far as the winter service, mostly we focus on doing long-term pest control that's preventative in nature. So that's clearly what this is. That product will stay in those walls for a long time and will prevent bugs coming up from the crawl space and from the outside for at least a year. It depends on how much airflow they have through the house and depends on how many bugs they have, but it'll last for quite a while. But once you finish the outlets, you do around the appliances and in the bathroom and the garage. Other places that you can treat are windows if you have time. Attics, crawl spaces are really good. If you treat a window, I'll trade you places, Scott. If you treat a window, you can treat right here, and then to treat a window, this is the wrong tip to use. You want to use the fine tip because you can, remember, I can't tilt this down. It's going to glob down. So this kind of bends a little bit, and so now this is down there, but my bulb duster is basically on a generally upward, and then you dust, and you would probably see dust that would pop out through here and would treat that whole area. And then I lost my little tip, so I'll put that back on. Now there's one other thing for safety. Anytime you're applying the product, you want it in a place where it's tucked away from pets and kids. If a dog was to come and lick up Delta Dust, it would not kill them, but it would make the homeowner apprehensive. They understand that this is a poisonous material, and they know that it's in there to kill things, and so if their dog comes along and licks it up, that's obviously a problem. Like I said, it's not going to kill the dog, but it's going to be a problem in their mind, and so make sure that it's back away. That's why we inject it in crawl space or in wall voids, in crawl spaces and things like that. There's one other thing is the other thing I wanted to mention was with a vent like this, you may be tempted to dust inside of this because it clearly goes back into the wall void. It doesn't. Okay, this has a duct that does not lead, or at least should not lead. There probably is actually a breach somewhere in that duct for older houses, but it's not supposed to lead into the wall void or into the crawl space, or to be an open access to that. It's a duct that goes back to the furnace, and it doesn't matter if it's an intake or an vent where the air comes out. You don't want to treat that with dust because that's gonna, even if you put it in the intake, it'll suck it in, and then it'll cycle through, and then it'll push it back after it goes through the furnace and comes back out. Of course, it'll go through a filter, but you still don't want to do that. So for this kind of area to treat, if you do need to treat it, use liquid, because with liquid you can apply it and it'll dry on here, and then the fan can run and it'll be totally fine. The other thing that you can do with the baseboards all around the house is you can use liquid. Typically in the winter you want to mix your dust and your liquid, so don't just use dust. For the perception from the customer's point of view, they're going to like it better if you use multiple products, and it also looks better on the invoice. So even if you theoretically could do as good of a job with just a single product, still mix it up, use some liquid product. You can treat the baseboards if they are having an issue, or if it's a customer with a very low tolerance for bugs, then a thorough baseboard treatment all the way around the house will be effective. And you can use dust on all appliances, and then liquid throughout the house on baseboards and other places where liquid would be good, such as in the garage, on the patio. Another thing that I'd like to show you, so come with me in the garage, we'll show you in the video. Now, almost everybody uses their garages for storage of some kind, and some people have more stuff in there than others, but almost everybody has a little bit of boxes or a few boxes and things like that. And so dust is a good formulation to treat around these kinds of boxes all the way throughout there. You know, you can dust here. Again, just little poofs all around these boxes will get into areas that you can't get with liquid. One good use of liquid in a garage would be around the door seals. So right here, you know, if you apply dust here, the dust would be out and visible, which we don't want. But a liquid we could apply there, it dries, and then nobody knows it's there. It doesn't, you know, it adheres to that area. But where this garage door closes, if you open it and then apply a liquid right there along the bottom, especially if somebody has a garage and there's two slabs that come together, then there'll be a little hole where those two slabs connect. And when the garage door comes down and closes, that hole will remain and bugs can come in through there. So again, that is best treated with a liquid formulation and not a dust formulation. So to recap, dust is really good for treating around boxes, behind boxes, cracks and things like that, inside of walls, crawl spaces, voids and things like that. Liquid is good for you know, the floor, out in the open, door jambs. It's pretty good on windows, although on a window either dust or liquid can work pretty well because you just apply it in the sides and it drops down. And you know, liquid will run down and then cover that weep hole, whereas dust will be injected down and cover the weep hole. They both work pretty well. I slightly prefer liquid with a window weep hole over dust, but they're both pretty good. And then the other thing that you do in the winter is just make sure you do a good thorough inspection of the house. You know, you can submit an exclusion form to the customer for recommendations as far as doing caulking and other things. But that's basically the interior service, and concludes the tutorial.